Here's Carolyn Jarvis.
They are the most feared players in the NHL, whose role isn't scoring goals, it's knocking out the opponent. They're enforcers, scouted, drafted, and put on the ice for one thing: to fight. The NHL will tell you it's an integral part of the game. But the deaths this past summer of 3 NHL heavyweight fighters have cast a shadow over the sport, and they've prompted other players to speak out, describing a dark world of anxiety, sleepless nights, and depression. A world where they say they were suffering in silence. It's our national game, a game of speed and grace. It's in our blood and defines us as a nation. But there's another side to hockey, and that's fighting. Love it or hate it, it brings the crowd to its feet and sells tickets. But these are dark days for the NHL. 10 months ago, its star player Sidney Crosby was rocked by a hit he has yet to recover from. Then, a string of tragedies in the offseason left the hockey world reeling. First, Derek Boogaard, found dead from an accidental overdose of alcohol and prescription painkillers. A few months later, Rick Ripien, whose battle with depression was well known, committed suicide. 2 weeks later, another death, this time former Toronto Maple Leaf tough guy Wade Belak. The NHL and the Players Association continue to insist the circumstances of those 3 deaths were unique, but they all had one thing in common. All were fighters. Players who dropped their gloves hundreds of times to mete out hockey's unique brand of justice. And their deaths have opened a door onto a world that, until now, was kept secret. Jim Thompson knows all too well how dark that world can get. He isn't playing professional hockey anymore. He's coaching and giving motivational talks. But for 9 years, he was an NHL enforcer, and he doesn't think the 3 deaths this past summer were merely a coincidence.
Are they all linked? Is it all the demons, the lifestyle, the gladiator lifestyle? I say yes.
Thompson came close to the precipice himself.
It became a nightmare. Like, it just became where I was really saying, do I want to keep doing this? But there was times where I go, you know what? It's just killing me. It was, you know, I knew. And then there was the nights where I thought about taking my own life, that I was so depressed.
Did you come close to taking your own life?
Sure I did. You know what's funny is you play the game in your head, how am I going to do it?
You thought about how you were going to kill yourself.
How am I going to do it? You know, is it at the garage? I got to the point, like, I can't do this anymore. You know, I gotta pack my bags. It's over.
Well, nose is a little crooked. Lost a few teeth. Face fractured a few times. Pins in my hand. 12 surgeries. Number of concussions.
That's Ryan Vandenbush in his days as an NHL gladiator. These days, Vandenbush has a much safer job selling real estate in Simcoe, Ontario. Life after hockey has been treating him pretty well. When he's not on the road, he spends time with his family. But for 9 seasons, he took a beating and dished it out for 3 different NHL teams. And like many enforcers, Vandenbush was haunted by his job.
Well, you got to be able to turn on a switch like that. The night before the game, you ask my wife, she'll tell you, I was always zoned out.
What was it like when you went out on the ice every game?
It wasn't just that season. When the calendar turned August 1 is when the anxiety and the pins and needles started, and the sleepless nights started, because I knew I was about a month out of bare-knuckle fighting these 6'6" giants. And I knew that I was one punch from having my face shattered, and that's why I drugged myself and drank myself into numbness.
How often were you taking the drugs?
All the time. I was addicted to making myself survive this lifestyle.
It was tough, yeah, it was, and I did it, and like I said, that was my role, and I had no problem with my role. Well, goal scorers score goals, hitters hit, scrappers scrap. I mean, if there's an opportunity that calls and you have to do it, you better show up. You're enforcing justice, I guess, on the ice.
That's exactly what Vandenbush did back in 1997 in a preseason game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, a game that ended the hockey career of Nick Kypreos.
So we were out on the ice, and we were out against each other, and I asked him if he wanted to go, and we dropped the gloves and squared off.
Kyprios remembers every last detail of the fight, even what he told the referee.
I do remember in the fight telling them to back off.
Watch the fight carefully, and you can actually see the ref saying,
"You want me to come in now you want me to come in?" And I'm like, no. What I need to do is keep fighting, and I need to beat this guy so my coaches and general manager can sit there and say, hey, this guy can still do it. That's what I needed. Towards the latter part of it, I kind of let my guard down a little bit, and he caught me with the left hand and went down like an oak tree.
I ended up tagging him with one right on the jawbone, and unfortunately for him, it was his last game of his career.
I remember going back into the doctor's office and sitting there going, already at that point, I had my wits enough to sit there and go, man, this is getting tougher to make a living.
It left a nasty feeling in my gut, looking back and thinking that could have been me, but better him than me. Do I ever want to hurt a guy? No, but it happened.
Okay.
Vandenbush didn't win every fight. Over the span of his career, he figures he had at least a dozen concussions, most of which he kept to himself.
And I just knew to keep my mouth shut, and it was nobody else's fault but my own. And looking back, I probably would do the same thing again. I didn't want to get stigmatized as a tough guy that was concussion prone. Probably wasn't the smartest thing, but I'm here today. There's been times where I was sitting in the penalty box, I couldn't read a scoreboard. It was scary because you didn't know why you're depressed, because you should be at the top of the world. You're making good money. You're playing in the National Hockey League. You're playing with guys like Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier that are on the team. And what the hell do I got to be depressed about?
Jim Thompson had those same thoughts. But then there was also the drugs, the booze, and thoughts of suicide. He survived, but only barely. He's been clean for 3 years now, and with his motivational speeches, he's taking his message directly to young kids and elite hockey players. Thompson is calling for fighting to be taken out of the game once and for all.
And I knew my gut feeling, don't do it, baby.
Something he's taking a lot of flack for from fellow enforcers.
If you want to be a fighter, go to UFC, go to boxing. Okay, get fighting out of the hockey.
Next, playing with pills.
I've seen it many times. Guys getting so addicted to it that they can't sleep without it.
Drug addiction in the NHL.
Among the fraternity of NHL tough guys, former Montreal Canadian George Laraque was as tough as they come. In his 13 years in the NHL, he racked up over 1,000 minutes in penalties, but only scored 53 goals. Still in hockey-mad Montreal, Laraque is as close as they come to a hockey god. Today, he's visiting an inner-city school to meet with a class of special needs kids. Some are unaware of Laraque's place in the game, that he was one of the most feared fighters, and that suits Laraque just fine.
That's the part that I really didn't like about the job that I did, because I was promoting violence for kids. And every time I fought, I saw kids in the stands clenching their fists, wanting me to kill the other guy. And I didn't like that image. They think that it makes me proud, but...
Are you proud?
No, definitely not.
This is what keeps Laraque going, connecting with kids and doing charitable work. It's what gave him perspective during his playing days.
I found a totally different way to deal with the anxiety problem that I was having like everybody else. It was through charity work. I would go to an hospital, and I'd see a kid that just had surgery and fighting for his life. And when I looked through this bed, I know that this kid would rather be in my place fighting on the ice, somebody else other than fighting for his own life.
He may have been a giant among giants, but he wasn't immune to the fear and the loneliness.
Everybody that fights feels it,
What? Feel what? What did you feel?
Well, it's like The anxiety makes you can't eat the day of a game. You can't sleep. After your nap, you're sweating because you're thinking about the guy that you might have to fight the next game, and it's in your mind, it's in your head. Everywhere you walk, everything you look at, it reminds you of him. And you're not supposed to show people that you're scared. And then when people look at you, they're like, oh yeah, we have the toughest guy, he loves it.
So you struggle in silence.
Exactly, and that's what a lot of people are doing right now. They're struggling silent, and that caused a lot of people to go into medication because of it.
For The Rock, the NHL's promise to look into the circumstances surrounding last summer's deaths comes too late.
It's sad that we needed 3 deaths to finally look at the problem, the issue, and then try to solve it. But this is something that's been going on for years, and that's why we've seen lately what those problems could cause to some of the guys that have to struggle with this big anxiety that they feel.
What do you mean when you say we've seen it lately?
Well, just we've seen how some guys have used alcohol, drugs, steroids, all type of stuff, medication to fight this anxiety.
Talk to me about the specific pills people would take to ease that anxiety, to ease that tension.
Well, the biggest problem with the pill is the sleeping pills. I've seen it many times. Guys getting so addicted to it that they can't sleep without it. And that's obviously a big problem.
How many people are taking it? A couple, a dozen?
A lot. And I've seen guys taking it like candies. I've seen sleeping pill parties where guys were mixing it with alcohol and just to have a buzz.
Pill parties?
Yeah, pills parties.
So they all get together?
Yeah. A lot of guys gets together and then they mix it with alcohol just to have a buzz and to see who stays awake the longest or who acts the craziest while doing buzz. And it's unbelievable, the stuff that you've seen, and it's just part of living the life, living on the edge.
People will be surprised to learn this.
Well, yeah, because again, when you look at the sport that everybody loves, nobody is looking at the dark side of it.
Ryan Vandenbush witnessed the same thing.
I think there is an issue with pharmaceuticals, and you got time changes to deal with. And then now you got to move in, you got to check into a hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can't get to sleep, and you got a game the next day. So now you got to take a sleeping pill on top of that. Add alcohol to the mix, you know, if you have a couple of beers. So sometimes things can get out of control a little bit.
It's a world Chris Broadhurst saw up close during his 18 years as head trainer for the Leafs.
For players that were taking sleep aids and then having a couple of drinks, the mixture of the two is not something that's safe to do on a long-term basis. And you know, I certainly saw issues with that. I think it's a wake-up call for us all to look at it and try to understand sort of how we can assist these players in diffusing some of the stresses that they feel.
How many players in the NHL would you estimate are struggling quietly right now without telling people?
There's a lot.
Is it just a coincidence that we have 3 enforcers who die all in one summer? What are we supposed to take away from that?
The fact that 2 of them has committed suicide, that I wasn't as surprised that they were enforcers, because I know how tough the job is, and I know what it does to you, how the depression deals with your body and stuff.
You're saying their role as an enforcer possibly drove them to death?
Possibly, yeah.
We will see more deaths if we don't do something.
Definitely, yeah. This is not the end of it.
Next, paying the ultimate price for the game.
People ask me about how I feel about Donald losing his life to a sport.
What did you feel?
The anxiety makes you can't eat the day of a game. You can't sleep.
There's been times where I was sitting in the penalty box, I couldn't read a scoreboard.
And then there was the nights where I thought about taking my own life, that I was so depressed.
This could be the end.
Pills, addiction, depression. These aren't the things the NHL wants to be known for, but they were brought to the forefront after the deaths this past summer of 3 players, 2 from suicide, the other from an overdose. We'll never know if those tragedies can be linked, But they do pose a riddle that Dr. Charles Tatter believes he may have the answer to.
You know, it's only recently that we're able to connect some of the dots between repeated concussion leading to depression and then depression leading to suicide.
Dr. Tatter leads the Canadian Sports Concussion Project, a group of scientists who came together 2 years ago to study the brains of deceased athletes. It's still early days, but Dr. Tatter believes they may be onto something.
What are you finding thus far?
Well, we have actually received the brains of 6 Canadian Football League retired players, and we've completed our analysis of the first 4. And we found that 2 of the 4, in fact, had this condition called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is a big mouthful. We've referred to it as CTE.
And what is it? What does it mean if you have CTE?
The brain actually degenerates after repeated concussions. All 4 of these players had repeated concussions, but only 2 of them had this condition.
You touched on the issue of suicide there. We had 3 NHL players lose their lives this past summer. Is it plausible that these 3 players could have suffered from CTE because of repeated blows to the head?
We are thinking that the blows to the brain are, in fact, a cause of depression, and the depression can lead to suicide.
To better understand what they're looking for, Dr. Sidney Kroll, a neuropathologist, shows us a brain, not of an athlete, but of someone recently deceased.
With trauma, you can get contusions to the base of the frontal lobe and the temporal tips. With a lot of concussions, you don't, with the individual head trauma, have enough force of injury to actually damage that, but over time you get repeated small traumas and atrophy.
With all this evidence, not just from the world of science, but from players themselves, we wanted to know where exactly the NHL stands on the issue of fighting. And we wanted to hear it from the top, the commissioner of the league, Gary Bettman. But Bettman didn't want to talk to us. Instead, this is what his PR department had to say.
One is that he's under no obligation to do it. He's not the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Canada. This is not a life or death issue.
Not a life or death issue? That's not what Donna Sanderson would tell you. While the NHL continues to remain non-committal on the issue of fighting, Donna has been trying to get the message out where it counts, with the sport's youth. Tonight, she's at York University, her son's alma mater, telling her story to hundreds of athletes. In 2008, Donna's world changed in an instant. It was in this game that her son Donald, a rookie defenseman with the Whitby Dunlops, got into a fight and later died.
About 11:30 in the evening, I got a phone call telling me that Donald was injured and he was in the hospital. And there was a lot of bleeding. He had a severe concussion. And unfortunately, Donald's helmet had fallen off before he fell to the ice. And that's how he ended up with his concussion. Within a very short time, we were told that he was experiencing a lot of swelling in his brain. And the only way that they could deal with it was to have his frontal lobes removed. He was going to have brain surgery.
Despite his doctor's best efforts, Donald remained in a coma.
When Don wasn't responding to treatment, we had to have some serious discussions. And on January the 2nd is when we made that decision. And Donald went to sleep permanently and left us.
Feels like yesterday.
Yes. It feels like yesterday. And it feels like he's sitting beside me right now. I know that he's probably got a really good all-star team going on right now, playing whenever he wants to play.
Donald Sanderson's death in early 2009 The first death that was the direct result of a fight galvanized the hockey world. Even Gary Bettman was forced to address the issue of fighting, but still defended it as part of the game.
I don't foresee a point that fighting as part of the game would simply be eliminated. The Sanderson tragedy was exactly that, a terrible tragedy, although that was in a league that didn't permit fighting.
Donna Sanderson is clear on her position. What role do you think fighting should have in hockey?
None.
You think it should be eliminated completely?
Absolutely.
How about the NHL? Should it be an exception to that rule?
No, not at all.
So how do you convince the NHL to get rid of it?
Convincing the NHL is like going after a huge business and asking them to pull the plug on making profits. They have a huge business to run.
Nick Kyprios understands that world. As a former fighter who has made the transition into broadcasting, he knows what makes the NHL tick.
You know, we look at that death and, you know, it haunts us all, but, you know, it doesn't appear even a death like that will overly affect how the NHL runs their business and conducts themselves. There's 30 owners that run the NHL, and they're business guys. And when they feel like fighting is hurting their bottom line, they'll remove it. But if they feel like fighting can take a $3 billion industry and help them make it $4 billion, it's not going anywhere.
If there is a death on the ice from fighting, I think it probably would lead to banning it outright. But these slower deaths, the ones that occur from CTE, those are some of them deaths from fighting.
If it takes the death of another player, that's really sad. Because the fact that one player's already died should be more than enough. The fact that it's, from my perspective, essentially been ignored, that's disrespectful to human life.
You said at the very beginning that Don wanted to teach people.
Yes.
What would be his lesson today?
His lesson today? His lesson today, I'm just listening to his voice. And all I want to say is, hey, didn't you learn your lesson when I left? So what are you waiting for? Let's make a change.
Next, reliving Dieppe.
It was a massacre.
70 years later.